Hey,
Hello.
how's it going?
Not too bad. How you doing?
I'm good. Not my bubbly. I'm gonna get it out of frame. Lest you think I'm drinking that bubbly. I have a reputation to protect. Anyway, yeah. yeah. How was it? There was like a roof thing with you a while back, right?
Yeah, it seems fine now. We had to have like a ton of drywall work done, and yeah, at one point some contractor was like, "You need an entirely new roof." He was wrong, or just
Oh,
trying to get a lot of money, which is the more likely scenario. Um, but yeah, things are good now. We have walls again. There's no water in them. It's great.
ah, ah. I am a fan of walls.
Yeah.
Like it's stressful when they're open. You're
Yeah.
like,
Yeah,
this
it's
isn't
no good.
normal.
I
Yeah.
really did want to put a model skeleton back there before they sealed them up, just as like a fun little surprise for any future owners that had to open the walls, but didn't get around to it.
Not just a real skeleton.
I don't know where to source one.
There was a John Oliver about that, I believe. I probably took away the wrong message from it though. I know you can get a skeleton.
Hey, how are we doing on the calendar thing? I saw Daniel said it got added to the CNCF calendar.
Yes, the community meetings are on the CNCF calendar now.
Do you mind updating the link then?
Sure.
Okay.
You got. Are we good to get started? Max, is anyone else from Google joining?
No, I'm good on that. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Um, so I think I had on the list today just a milestone check-in, which since we're good with 315 now, I figured it would be good to just look at what we currently have tagged for 316 since there's quite a lot of stuff here. I want to make sure that this is still looking right to folks and we feel this is achievable. And if there's anything we should punt to 317. Um, so I think we can just kind of run through these real quick if that sounds okay. Um, so the first one we've got is remove the validate template rego in 316, which Rita, that one looks like it's assigned to you.
It was created by me.
Oh,
This
never
is
mind.
this is yeah, I think it's in scope because that's what we said we would do at the time of adding it. We said we would remove it in
Yeah.
16.
Yeah. And it's a pretty simple one, right?
Should
It's
be.
just like a three-line change.
Afterwards.
Yeah.
Should be. I think it's more just about, I think, communication, making sure that our release notes highlights this when we cut the release, you know.
Sounds good.
We can move to the next one if there's no objections.
Looking at this seems like it'll be pretty straightforward too, removing RBAC for finalizers from manifest. Seems like a straightforward change, yeah.
Yeah, it's not critical in either direction. We haven't used finalizers in a long time, but it's good cleanup.
Do we want to like move them up and down based on priority? That way, like if you think it's lower in priority, we can probably shift or the higher priority item down, up, I mean.
Yeah, it's like the definition of nice to have.
Yeah.
Sounds good. I thought these were like by default ordered by issue number. I didn't realize you could drag them around. That's cool. Pub sub to validation webhook. Jay, do you think that you'll be able to manage that along with enforcement actions, or what are you thinking there?
I don't think that's gonna be the case because.
Sorry,
I
you're
was talking about-
extremely quiet for me.
Oh, wait, sorry.
You're muffled, Jay.
Is it still quiet?
Much better.
Okay. Okay, cool. Yeah, I was saying I haven't even started on design documents, so it's gonna take some time for to start work on the design document of validation webhook. So maybe we should.
I think if I remember the last time we talked, we kind of decoupled validation webhook pub sub from enforcement action based on like the things we're thinking. Is that accurate, or am I misremembering?
That's still for discussion. I don't think we discussed about separating. I think we discussed about separating pub sub with enforcement points. I don't think we discussed about excluding pub sub from validation.
Oh, not excluding, just that they were orthogonal.
Yeah,
Right.
that I don't recall we discussed that, but I think that's what.
Yeah, maybe I see it's on the roadmap later, so maybe we'll know. The only reason I ask is that seems salient to the ordering here, right? I don't know which one people view as more important, the pub sub versus enforcement action. But if they're separate, completely separate items, it might make sense to make a choice.
I bumped up enforcement action above the pub sub for validation webhook at the moment. Yeah.
I think continuing on the momentum would be better.
You've gotten quiet again. Sorry.
Oh, I think continuing on the momentum of enforcement would be better than starting with design on validation.
Your audio sounds like it's kind of underwater. Should we chat about the mutate restrict policy to specific verb while Jay addresses audio stuff?
Yeah, and I think maybe the thing to do for those two is just, since there's a discussion later, maybe we could circle back to this once it becomes clear if there are two separate things or not.
Sure.
All right, mutate to specific verb. This is the create update stuff. So I don't know how widespread this has been announced yet, but Alex and Davis have been reassigned to different work. So they probably won't be joining us in open source lens anymore. I do expect more people to come, but it'll take a bit for them to ramp up. So there might be a funding issue here in the near term.
Sounds good. I will drag this one down then for now until we make it a little further into this cycle, and you've got a better idea of what what you can expect there, and we can always drop it if it's not looking like that's going to come together before 316.
Cool. Thank you.
Am I audible now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, finally. Yeah, so I was saying about enforcement point and webhook that I don't have any design set for validation webhook, so I don't know which one to pick.
Right. And I think priority should more stem off of which behavior are we hurting more for the lack of having. VAP may have some bearing on this. Like, we can get to that maybe when we're looking over your design doc for enforcement action. Specifically, I think there's edge cases around supporting delete or not. Yeah, as I said, we can circle back. It probably we'll have a better discussion when we have more details in our head.
Sounds good. Status to providers.external data.
Same funding. Oh wait, this is external data. Sorry, I was thinking SyncSet.
I think this is similar to last milestone, last release is, I think if we can get to it, let's try. But not like a blocker or anything, I guess.
Sounds good. Design and implement batch publishing for PubSub.
Yeah, that also isn't being actively worked on.
Right. Yeah, I think with that one, I mean, if work hasn't started on it yet, I'm inclined to maybe just say that we should probably wait for 317 for that one and maybe start design doc work during 316. But we can leave it here for the moment, and then as we do another like milestone check-in, as we move forward, we can see where we're at on it. But yeah. Status to config.
Same as the other one, so just put it under external data is good. Below that, yeah.
Cool. And VAP.
That should be like number 1.
Yeah, cool.
I might be biased, but yeah.
Controller runtime fork. I know this one's been floating around for a little while.
I think that one is external. Oh, go ahead, Max.
Oh yeah, last I checked, this one is just blocked on controller runtime, cutting a release.
Yep. I think it's a fairly short amount of work, just depending on the external factor.
Yeah, it also like really doesn't matter when this happens. It's just the next time we update controller runtime, we should remove the fork.
Sure. Sounds good. I am working on this one. I've got a little checklist on there. Got some of that done. SyncSet's tracking issue for SyncSet proposal.
Yeah, how we want to manage this one will also probably be affected by the changes here. Like, I don't know about this whole tracking issue thing, particularly if we've reduced the number of people working on it. My understanding is Online still has some states here. And at some point, I probably want to like sync up with her because I'll probably take over because Julian was kind of looking over that stuff, and he also has some changes in his attention set, so I'll be taking over that. At least in the near term.
It sounds like this is something we want for 316. Is that right?
I think it's up to you. Like, I'm fine if sync set stuff.
Can we
Yes.
open that real quick? Because I remember we talked about like what are beta blockers and whatnot, right? So
Yeah, like, so,
bottom. Mhm.
and there's some like definitional stuff here. Like,
Right.
I think we want to have status on the sync set objects themselves.
Right.
But also there were some designs around having status probably on the constraint template around leveraging that annotation, right? And making sure that the appropriate syncs were installed. To me, these are maybe separate work streams, like sync sets working properly and improving the UX around constraint templates requiring syncs.
Mhm.
They're related but not tightly coupled to me.
Mhm. Makes sense.
Yeah, so depends how we slice it.
Right. So if that's the case, I mean, I feel like, okay, to correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like the enforcement action stuff is probably at the most like alpha, right? This 316 at the most.
It's at the most what? No?
Like alpha, like is alpha even is achievable is the question.
It's at the highest risk. Like, it's still kind of in the design phase. We're going through, I think, a design doc later this meeting.
Right. I
If
guess the
there's
reason I'm asking the question is like with the limited people, right? Do we want to focus on shipping, like getting an alpha out the door, or do we want to focus on graduating an alpha to beta, if that makes sense?
I kind of want to raise an issue around the VAP stuff before we make a decision around that.
Gotcha. Okay, well then it's fine to leave it where it is because we still want to track it. It's just maybe priorities different depending on
Yeah, you're saying like we could actually put this in beta and that's achievable,
I
whereas
think
the
so.
enforcement action is
well, because I feel like
tenuous.
adding status to sync is much easier than like I feel like enforcement action stuff is still like we're probably harder because we don't even have anything today, right?
Yeah, sync sets, if I manage to get like maybe 2 days, I could probably put status in.
Yeah. So I think where it is fine because we still want to track it and priority wise, I think it's fine where it is. What do others think?
Sounds good to me. Should we touch on this last one then? The this docs one?
Sure.
What is the docs change?
Oh, did I comment on this? Can you scroll down, Xander? All the way. Yeah, okay, that one is. Yeah, this is when we do the controller runtime fork, when we get rid of that, this is going to get resolved.
Okay.
This is just like a weird go install thing. Yeah.
Sounds good. I will just keep it paired in priority with the controller runtime fork then.
Good to know it's breaking something, though. I didn't realize there was any pain caused by the fork existing.
I think Go changed their behavior. So when you did Go get at previously, it didn't error out on replace directives. So now with Go install, it errors out on replaces. So previously it used to just ignore them. So because of that, so because of Go install now errors out, and the error is like super cryptic. You don't even know if that's an actual error. So it doesn't actually install it. But again, the users can install from the GitHub release or brew, so it's not like an actual problem.
Gotcha.
Cool. Well, glad we ran through that. I will cede my time and pass to Jay for enforcement action stuff.
So last time, in the last community meeting, we talked about changing some of the things, Max, from the initial design that we discussed. And TLDR is that we introduced a new enforcement action called scoped rather than none. And then when scoped is used, we only take actions into whatever configurations are provided through the list. And if not, then we ignore the list and follow the current behavior. So that's the change, as opposed to what we discussed as opposed to what we discussed on if none is not specified, then we include both of the enforcement mechanism rather than one.
Do you want to share the doc maybe?
Yeah.
Because I know you have some examples that's super helpful to me.
Let me just give me a minute. Okay, cool.
Can you zoom in a bit?
Okay. Is it better?
A couple more notches, if you can. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think examples were here. Yeah, so instead of none, we are using scoped to only enforce whatever is there in the list. And if anything but scoped is defined as enforcement action, then we just ignore the past list and enforce whatever else. I think that was the TLDR of the change.
I kind of remember it. What I was discussing with you, at least, like the scoped thing is new to me, and what I remember is you would have enforcement action, but then also enforcement actions. And but it wasn't like there was one was a replacement for the other. It was like in tandem, right? So you took whatever action was an enforcement action would be enforced everywhere.
Yeah.
And then enforcement actions, basically, it would take effect if those would happen if whatever system happened to recognize them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sorry, my bad. Yeah, that was the case. And to only enforce the enforcement actions, we decided we would introduce a new enforcement action called none. So that will disable the global behavior, and then that will disable the wider behavior and then only enforce the configuration. I think that's what we discussed. But later in the community meeting, when we discussed the same solution, there is one more idea that came around, which was this: instead of using none and having both of them in tandem, we use scoped to reduce the scope of a particular constraint on how it is applied for enforcement points and actions. So does it make sense to you? Do you want me to go through examples?
Yeah, I think the comment we were talking about in the last call was the none was like a little bit confusing, and then also like things like dry run or warm would basically set like a minimum bar, and it would basically like build up from there. So I think Rita suggested this scoped enforcement action. This would be like a new one, and then also renaming the enforcement actions, and then that was also confusing, enforcement action versus actions, in a renaming to scope enforcement actions to make it more like more specific to this, and it's easy to understand.
Okay, so I want to be clear, like the default value for enforcement action, which is deny, that can't change, right? Like that is fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, so then scoped basically. So the interesting thing there is that couples the two fields. Is that a bad?
Only if you define scoped, then you can define scoped enforcement actions. So it's kind of like, hey, I want to start from nothing, like it's non-equivalent, and then build up from there.
Yeah. So it kind of like changes it from something that's additive to enforcement action also becomes like a toggle, essentially. Oh, if you could keep presenting, it was helpful to.
Yeah, my computer froze, so that's why.
Oh no.
Yeah, give me a moment. I can still
We can
hear
still
you.
hear you.
Yeah, I
Fancy.
can also still hear you, but I don't see anything on my screen.
Oh no. We'll just stare at you until you get your tech issues sorted out, if that's okay. We won't speak, but we will be staring at you.
Yeah.
No. Yeah, okay, so then. Yeah, I don't know about the terminology of scoped, but by shedding on words, to me, that's kind of like the last stage. Like understand the shape of the thing, then name it.
Yeah, I think it's the scope inspiration came from the validating admission policy.
Yeah, I was looking at that.
Where does VAP use scoped?
No, not VAP, the old one, VAC or validating admission configuration. You know how we have like the config stuff, sorry, the scope, where you define as a namespace or cluster wide. It's inspired by that.
Scope
Oh,
namespace.
it's under rules, so it's like that.
Right, rule, right.
Yeah. It's like roles, scope, namespace, or
Yeah.
cluster, whatever.
Interesting. I don't think I see a problem. I would like wordsmith it. I don't think it's ready for wordsmithing yet.
Yeah, we can always change it later on. That's just like the naming of stuff.
Yeah, and I don't think I see a problem with the shape. Like, yeah, I don't think it violates any K8s backwards compatibility. Like, we should double check, but if you guys have, I believe you. If you said it doesn't violate any of these principles.
Yeah, as for I went back and looked at the API change guideline as well. I don't think it violates any of the things as long as we keep the defaulted values as they are. If we decide to change, then it will obviously break the compatibility.
Cool. Is there anything else about this design that you wanted to show?
Oh no, this was the change of behavior that we discussed in the
Okay.
community meeting. So I just
One thing I
wanted.
want to also add is with enforcement action being like a toggle to your point with scope, it will also allow us to do validation. Because I think the old, like other options didn't quite give us that. And it would be pretty hard for users to know when one of them kicks in versus like the default behavior. Yeah. Just want to add that.
Yeah, yeah, I'm kind of like even odds. Not, I see your point. The one thing I wanted to bring up in context of this, though, would be in validating admission policy. Delete is a funny thing, right? Which I think highlights a syntactical gap we have right now. So currently for gatekeeper with the webhook, we kind of lean on the rego to handle should I be delete or not. And also we lean on the validating webhook configuration as to whether delete gatekeeper is called for delete or not, right? Currently by default, it's not, and users have to opt in. And with validating admission policy, what's interesting is one, we're bypassing that whole validating webhook configuration thing. And two, there could be some very surprising results if we talk about like constraint templates and constraints, right? So imagine, say, the K8s required labels constraint. We rewrite that as a VAP style constraint template. And let's say we want to make it as generic as possible. So we require labels on both like object and old object, right? And this is to say, unblock the use case of, I want to disallow deleting anything with a critical label on it or something like that. So users can like safeguard their workloads. And VAP, to be clear, it would be the place I would recommend people have delete constraints if they want them, because it's probably the least operationally fraught. The problem, though, is that there's also unintended consequences around if you have a pre-existing object that has some disallowed label or is missing a label, right? And the user wanted to remediate that by deleting that object. The delete would be disallowed because a constraint would be violated, right? And currently there's no knob for us to choose allow the user to choose what behavior they want for VAP. So we can kind of like make the choice for them right now. Right now we're doing all actions are in scope, which is probably the wrong thing. So then maybe we only do update and create, but then how do we support delete, right? Maybe we add a flag or something, but then the user is stuck with like an all or nothing proposition, right? And there's other issues that have been filed over the years around this, where users have selection criteria that they're interested in using, but match criteria are probably the wrong place to put it, because match criteria is around the shape of the object itself, because that's the most portable, right? You can audit still works with the match criteria we have, right? It wouldn't work if you could match off the requesting user, for instance, because we just don't have that context when we're pulling from the K8s API server. So if I try to like mesh these two concepts together, one thing I'm seeing is selectors that are relevant to the enforcement point themselves, right? So you can imagine for VAP, if you consider VAP an enforcement point, one selector you could have is the request verb, right? And then for admission generally, One selector you could have is requesting user, right? Or the groups the user was in. Or let's get wild, time of day, right? Or something like must be during working hours or something like that.
The-
So,
Are
and,
you,
and we'll go.
sorry, just to interrupt, so with the operation stuff, right, for VAP, that is at the VAP level, not binding level, right? And it's, well, I'm looking at it, it is at the VAP level,
It's at the definition level, you're saying, not the
That's right.
binding?
yeah. So
That's unfortunate.
I know,
Uh,
that's why I stopped you. I think I know where you're going with this, but I'm not sure there's like a one-to-one mapping here.
Oh, that's fine. We could cover that gap with match constraints. Like technically the definition would still be called, but it would be termed out of scope. Because we could check the operation in a match constraint. And if it didn't match whatever selection criteria we define, we would short circuit the execution.
Right, but that's still at the VAP level, right? Sorry, let me back up a little. As
Right.
you said today in Gatekeeper, like the operations is all or nothing, right? At the webhook level, right?
Yes.
Right?
So-
Okay. Now, this is sort of net new for Gatekeeper, right? Meaning, hey, instead of all or nothing, we want to actually, it sounds like, I think that's where you're going, right? Is we want to give users an option to define operations at the policy level. So now the question does the new operations field, does it belong in constraint or constraint template?
And it has to be, I think there's a solution to the problem you're posing. Let me lead with that, but I think it has to be in the constraints because I don't think the constraint template author is in the place to know the intent of the user, right? Like with the required labels thing, right? Is the user wanting to prevent an important object from being removed, or they want bad state to keep it from existing? So, but
I
in
think
terms of
we're-
this,
For what it's worth, we are aligned on that. It's just, that's why I'm mentioning for VAP, however, the operation, like knob is in the VAP, at the VAP level, not the binding.
right, so what I would probably do, and let me zoom back a little bit to just describe the rough flow of how the VAP stuff is. So we have the constraints, right? And that becomes the parameter resource for the policy definition, right? And we have the VAP binding, which is kind of irrelevant here, except it just like links the constraints to the policy definition. As you pointed out, the request method doesn't, that's not a part of the binding, right? But so the definition has access to the contents of the constraint, right? And match constraints, the logic there is if there's any match constraint that's not satisfied, the rules and the definition won't run, right? So it's like an extension of these other like match requirements. And checking the request method is one of those match requirements, right? So even though we don't have a knob in the binding, what we would do is I could write some cell for a match constraint that would query whether the user has provided any kind of like scoping, like must be for create, update, delete, or what have you.
I see what you
And
mean.
then, what's up?
I see what you mean. So basically, in the match constraints, you have an expression that uses the parameters or something from the constraint, right?
Yeah, it would look at the scoped enforcement actions
Okay,
field,
Okay,
let's
yeah,
say.
I think I get what you mean. Yeah, I think that makes sense. So are you proposing adding something new to constrain then? To support?
Yeah, so what I'm saying is this API change gives us an opportunity to make enforcement points a little fancier as well, right? By adding, I don't know, enforcement point selectors or whatever makes sense criteria that lets users match against metadata that is associated with an enforcement point.
I think that will work well with the VAB integration. However, for like existing gatekeeper stuff, with like, regos, we would have to think about what that experience looks like. Because as you said today, by default is all or nothing. With the,
Yeah,
yeah,
well, I think one, backwards compatibility, right? Like config and behavior that exists today should be valid today and valid tomorrow and the same tomorrow, respectively, right? So users don't change anything, the results they get don't change. With regard to new stuff, this is just another layer, right? Where if users want to add a matcher on admission or audit or wherever, they can. So in practice, what this would unblock is those users who are saying, I want to have some kind of like a super user, right? Like these are my on-call people, they could do whatever. Or, this only particular users are subject to whatever rule, that kind of thing. Now you don't need to be able to write Rego in order to customize any pre-existing template to that particular need.
do you mind if we pin this and come back later? Because I feel like this is a little bit of additional enhancement, right? It's,
Yeah,
I think we need to think about it a little bit more, especially for like backward compatibility reasons. And then for the rest of the doc, like I think I'm comfortable with what it's suggesting. And so, I think we should unblock this design doc and then come back and talk about the operation stuff later, if that's okay.
So I would say before we embrace this design doc as done,
Well,
we would
not
want to.
done, implementable.
Yeah, implementable. We would want to have a position on that because the thing about API stuff is that, there's this concept of YAGNI that doesn't really apply as much for APIs because it's hard to walk back those decisions, right? Like we're seeing this with enforcement actions, scoped enforcement actions. We had a bunch of like backwards compatibility concerns, right? And so if we know that there's some missing surface that we need, it's cheaper, even if it like delays immediate implementation, right? If it delays things by, let's say, a week, if it saves a month down the road, in the medium term, because we know, say, we need this for VAB, that's important. And what I see here is enforcement points is a list of strings, right? And is that compatible with having enforcement point selectors or whatever we would want to call it? Maybe so, maybe no, I don't know. So knowing that there's a path forward, to me, that's the blocker. Like, we don't need an explicit design, but we do need to know that we're not like backing ourselves into a corner.
Yeah. Understood. Yeah, I was just hoping to unblock Jay so that he
Yeah.
can start, yeah, because this has been dragged on for a bit, so.
Yeah, but in a way that's good, right? That it's been dragged on, because we wouldn't have gotten to where we are with VAP to where we knew this question was salient.
Sure. I mean,
And
yes,
yeah.
that's always a positive way to look at it.
So it's
What would-
frustrating, but for
what would you
overall health.
propose- Yeah,
Sorry, go ahead.
what would you propose for the operations? How would it look like?
Well, we would need some kind of selector. I would kind of take match criteria as a prototypical example here. We would need some way of associating different match criteria with different enforcement points. Maybe some way of doing schema, maybe not. That would remain to be seen. So I think the salient question, as far as like whether what we have right now is sufficient, would be whether we think there is a way to add on this kind of like match criteria thing later, without changing this list of enforcement points stuff, right? And that could like I'm just throwing this out here, but that could like we leave this design as it is, and then we add another field called enforcement point selectors, and it's a list of objects where the first field is enforcement point name, and the second field is like selectors, and it looks kind of like Engine does for constraint templates. So there's like arbitrary schema. That's an example that would be compatible with this design. There are some drawbacks, right? People are repeating the enforcement point name is one. Two, maybe you would prefer a simpler syntax. I don't know, other than avoiding repetition, how you could simplify it, but yeah. So that's the kind of thing I'd want to think through, like not necessarily solidifying the reality of the design all the way through, but knowing that there's an extension point.
Yeah, it might be helpful to add a couple of examples. I know you're still thinking about it, but I'm having a hard time visualizing it.
Right. I
So
mean,
like,
what I
for
do,
example, are you thinking like match, kinds, and then like operations? I'm not sure we're on the same page on that one.
yeah, well, there's got to be a selector for which enforcement points the matchers, excuse me, are associated with. Right, because you might have different selection criteria at different places in your stack. If for no other reason than different places may have different shapes for that metadata. And then you need the actual selectors, right? So that's the bare minimum of data that needs to be piped through. And then the question is just, how do you shape it? What's the least confusing and most probably expressive way of shaping it?
I think Sertash wanted to say something.
I was just gonna say, Matt, you wanna edit to like just add what you've been thinking?
Yeah, I can add an example thought for sure. And as I said, my goal wouldn't necessarily be to block everything on everyone agreeing on the final shape, though. More important to me would be, are we comfortable with like the options we have for this future functionality, given the shape we are proposing, right?
Do you mean this selectors for the future?
Right. Like if we were to add selectors, right? Given the syntax that we've proposed, are the ways we can add selectors, do they make sense to users? Do they look good to us? Is there some like weird thing where they don't mesh well, right? And then if we're happy that we've set ourselves up for success, that's really all we need, right? We don't need to know what success, the final result would look like. We just need to know we're not shooting ourselves in the foot.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense to me. I think we just need to see some examples to better visualize it, and then. But I mean, the idea itself is fine. And then we can start with this and then just extend it with selectors, obviously. We just need to.
Yeah,
Agree.
I will say, I think VAP raises the salience of not just the selectors thing, but this overall scoped enforcement actions design, right? Like earlier we were talking about PubSub, right? Versus this. And I think part of why we were looking at enforcement actions was the PubSub issue. But if I think about VAP, right, and I think about how do we deal with the delete issue, right? Do we just like ignore it in the near term, or do we need a solution, right? This then becomes maybe a way to solve that problem, right? So when I think about prioritization.
Yeah, and then the main motivation was to be able to turn off audit, by the way, not PubSub.
Oh, right. I was kind of like, no, this stuff is related. I still think they're potentially related. This
But
is
yeah, that's where it came up, because somebody asked, hey, can I turn off audit? You said, no, you can't.
Yeah, that was the initial ask, yes. So let's make sure we solve that one first. Well, I do want to bring up the point, like let's say, again, going back to the operators thing, right? Operations thing. Again, if we're just looking at Gatekeeper today, right? If you have your validating emission configuration scope to say create an update, you don't have delete, and then in constraint you say I want delete, it won't work.
I think that's fine, right? Like that's kind of like if you had the config resource and you said, I want to exclude this namespace from admission enforcement. Well, yeah.
Well, let me finish my thought real quick.
Okay.
I think my point is, whatever the constraint can do, it's a subset of what you are allowing the webhook to do. Whereas VAP doesn't have this problem. So that's the first thing. The second thing is operations make sense for webhooks, right? For the webhook enforcement points, it makes sense for VAP, but it doesn't make sense for other enforcement points.
Right, which is why they should be coupled to the specific enforcement point.
When you say couple, what does that mean?
So what I was saying earlier is that when users select some of these matchers, right, like operations, they're only relevant for certain enforcement points.
Sure.
So users, when they specify these selectors,
yeah,
they should be associated with one or more enforcement points that the user indicates.
Right, and by the way, this has this problem today, right? So for example, you could say action is deny, and what was the example we had last week? Like it wouldn't make sense to have
Oh yeah,
dry run. I think it was dry run, right? Like
for admitting to cluster.
No. We had a example where, like, for that particular enforcement point, oh, I think it was dry run. Like dry run for other non-audit stuff doesn't really make sense, I think.
it makes sense for,
Sorry, no, that's not,
what,
I'm trying to remember, what was it?
I think it was warn and audit, right? Like because
Oh,
there is-
yeah, there you go. You wrote
Deny
it.
or
or
audit.
deny and
Yeah, there you
audit
go.
because like audit doesn't care about any of them. It just generates violations if
Yeah.
there is one.
yeah,
Right.
which is, oh, good.
I was gonna say deny or Gator, that sort of stuff, unless we give it a meaning, say Gator returning non-zero.
Yeah, and this is part of why, one, I never thought enforcement actions should be like a set number of values, because I think it changes based on who's doing the enforcing. And two, maybe you're right then that like we're kind of solving the same problem for both action and selectors here,
Mhm.
right? Where one thing that this design does is it allows you to associate a specific action with one or more specific enforcement points.
Mhm.
And the same could be said with about selectors, right? This
You mean
match thing.
operations,
Was that?
you mean operations.
Operation would be an example of a selector, right? Like another selector might be requesting user. Max wants to create a thing, or two different selectors. User equals max, action equals create.
Sure. So, yeah, and so for that case, like, say audit wouldn't make sense because it wouldn't have the user information,
Right, nor the operation. Yeah,
nor the operation, right? So that's what I'm saying is like a lot of these actions or operations don't make sense for all the enforcement points. So the user who is doing this has to already kind of know.
Yeah, I there's just no way they're gonna make sense, all of it.
Yeah,
yeah. And I think that's fine, right? Like users have to know their stack. What I'm hoping we can insulate users from is the need to know rego or cell if they're okay with like the pre-baked stuff, and the need to know the specifics of like how their various enforcement points are operationalized, right? Like, oh, gatekeeper plumbs through to VAP, and here's all the details. Like, if we can remove that complexity, that's great. But they should know what enforcement options are available to them, right? Which I think they're interested in knowing, right? Doesn't admin want things to be rejected or to be warned about? And they should know how they're able to scope those policies that they want to have, right? Like, I don't think it's unreasonable for them to know, like namespaces are associated with Kubernetes clusters, right? Or that and users are, you only really know who the user is at admission time and at no other time. Like, if anything, it's good that we surface that because people do try to write policies that just don't make sense for the enforcement point they're written in or they're targeting, right? And this decouples the complexity of writing something so they can more focus on, okay, what information is available where. Does that, do I feel, I couldn't tell if you were objecting or agreeing, to be honest, Rita, with some of your thoughts.
I agree in the like the desire. I'm not sure I 100% understand what you're looking for. I think you said selector multiple times. But I think until I see it on paper, I don't quite grok like exactly what you're envisioning. So maybe that's the next step, if you could put some, like, you know, what you're looking for in the doc, and then we can come back to it.
Yeah, I could do that.
Okay, and I guess Jay, sorry, we're gonna have to wait yet another week for this,
It's alright.
at least.
Max, would you wanna just like reach out whenever you have it, so we don't have to wait for a week? So if you're done.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll
whenever.
try to type something out today.
Oh, awesome.
I'll just add it to this doc, right?
Yep.
Thank you.
Let
Yeah.
me know if you need any access or something. I don't think you need it, but
Yeah, it's like in the drive, I think.
yeah, I think so.
Also, it's in the meeting notes too, so.
Oh, beautiful.
Well, we don't have time and we went over. I was gonna do a quick demo, but
I'm
y'all
sorry.
gonna have to wait next week. I swear, I thought this would be a quick one. I was like, oh, I get to do my demo.
I think you jinxed it.
I know, right?
But,
Freaking time.
yeah, for priorities, like, are you guys more interested in PubSub or the supporting the excluding audit in the near term?
I think they're like we talked about. They're like separate things. The pub sub is a separate thing than this one.
Right, so it's good we agree they're separate, but
Yeah.
no, then, given that, which do you want more? Priority wise.
You mean the pub sub, this pub sub CRDs, or what? This?
Well, there's work that needs to be scheduled, right? Which should, if you only have the one person to do the work, and they have a choice between working on PubSub or working on this design, which one?
I think we're doing Jay looking at it both in parallel. When like this is waiting for review, he works on the pub sub and like vice versa.
Okay, so you think there's no need to choose?
I don't think there's like a one is like, hey, like this is significantly urgent than the other one. But I think in terms of priorities, like I think VOP is probably the first priority.
That, okay, cool.
No pressure with that.
I
Caverna was
wanted
at
to show you the demo, but I didn't get to.
Caverna was at the SIG API machinery cell sync meeting the other day. They were hoping to, they have this exception, and I know we're over, I apologize, so. Sorry for, feel free to leave, I guess. But they have this exceptions mechanism, and it has selectors that have semantics that are different than what's in VAP. Probably the changes that they were asking for, I don't think they're compatible with like how VAP syntax is currently working, right? Like version conversion is tightly coupled with the resource selector in VAP currently. And what they were proposing would break that. The conclusion was they should look at match conditions and see if it meets their needs. So, yeah, I don't think there's anything actionable in any of that, but I thought you guys might be interested.
Yeah, if you don't, if there's any discussion you think we should be aware of, like just link it in on Slack.
Okay, yeah, I'll do that.
Okay. Right.
Cool.
Well, next week we will have the demo. Okay, bye.
Yeah.
Bye.